Okay, hello. Let me just quickly fix this. I realize it's a little, this might get awkward, but I realized I didn't fix that before I got on live. But, anyways, hello. Hi, welcome, beautiful. I am Eileen Nazario, and I love to talk about careers from the perspective of spirituality, femininity. And it's pretty much the way I have led my own career path up until this point in my life. And I really just love to follow my heart. And I pair following my heart with having a very clear understanding of the trends of where the world is headed, where we are now, and where life is headed. So, I want to start off by sharing just the seed that really all of this came from. I was having a conversation with my friend, my mentor, my big sister, Mina Arfan. And for those of you who know her, you know how amazing she is. And our conversation really centered around the idea of entrepreneurship versus employment. And of course, many of us have the idea of where do we fit? Where do we belong? Are we entrepreneurs? Are we employees? For those of us who are already on the entrepreneurship path, that might not be a question you have. For those of us who have zero desire to be entrepreneurs, that might not be a question you have. But what about those of us who can fit on either path? What about those of us who maybe are unclear, who are unsure, who just don't quite know yet? Especially given like the cultural shifts that we are experiencing, lots of people are essentially leaving their 9 to 5. They're leaving the 9 to 5 model in droves. And employers, you can say, aren't necessarily only competing against other employers, like, will you leave your job to find another job? No. Employers are competing with you leaving your job to start your own company, to start your own business as well. So people are doing it. If you think about the gig economy, there are many, many, many ways to make money out there beyond just the traditional 9 to 5 model. So people are taking full advantage of that. You've got people starting social medias that are bringing in tons of money, taking on gigs, helping people build out their own businesses. You've got all types of things. So, on a very subconscious level, that leaves some people wondering, wait, should I be starting my own business? And look, this is a question that I have grappled with myself. So I've been there and I 100% understand how overwhelming it can be trying to figure that out, especially when you're holding a job, right? Because that requires time and energy from the hours of whatever your hours are. But let's say the standard 9 to 5, it requires energy. So imagine on top of that, trying to figure out whether you should start a business or not. So, this is essentially a three-part series where we're starting with this video here, which is the divine calling, the energetics of entrepreneurship versus employment. Tomorrow, we'll be diving into deciding whether or not to quit your 9 to 5 to start that business. And then lastly, we'll jump into the energetics of career transition. So, that's essentially uh, how to do the thing and how that might feel for some of us. And two out of three, or maybe all three of these lives, I haven't decided yet, will be pulled down and I'll be putting them as pre work modules, pre work lessons within the masterclass that I will be launching very soon, The Divine Calling, the energetics of entrepreneurship versus employment. Some of you have already seen that, so we'll dive into that later. To kick off the series, I want to start by stating that while the question, should I be an entrepreneur or an employee? For example, like, should I start my own business or should I stick to my 9 to 5? While that is an important question, it's, in my opinion, the wrong question to start with because your calling is far bigger, far wider, far grander. It spans lifetimes, it spans all types of buckets or categories we can conceive of as human beings. It spans all types of paradigms. So your calling is so much bigger than this question. And while it is important for you to understand your own personality, it is important for you to understand what you fit most, what you're more naturally inclined towards being as a person. While that is important, it's also understanding that there's an energy to your calling, and that will give you clues as to where you're supposed to be right now, and also where you're going in the future, because we all know it can change throughout your life. So you can be an entrepreneur today, an employee tomorrow, and vice versa. So I want to bust this myth that you must do one versus the other. And one thing that is important to state as well is that it requires self awareness and experimentation, right? So some people are more naturally inclined towards one versus the other. Some people have very natural entrepreneurial traits. And the ones who do, let's say if you don't have those very natural entrepreneurial traits, the ones who do might eat your lunch. So I'm saying all this to state that all not everyone needs to start a business. Just because everyone else is doing it, many people are doing it, it doesn't mean each and every single one of us needs to. Some of us were divinely created to have more of that structure that you might find in a 9 to 5 traditional model. So let's dive right into it. Let's start to talk about the energetics of entrepreneurship versus employment. Are you one versus the other? Um, Starting with the fact that learning in general, right? Because as an entrepreneur and as an employee, learning will be a big part of what you do day to day, right? As an entrepreneur, a lot of your learning is going to be continuous. You're going to have to learn continuously throughout the entirety of your time um, holding your business, because as an entrepreneur, you're seeking growth, you're seeking expansion in all ways, always. So on the other hand, you have the employees who might learn heavily in college and apply that throughout their career. So, if you studied engineering, for example, you might continuously apply the things you've learned in engineering to your job. So, you're front loading a lot of your learning at the start of your career. And that front loading really, although it does require some upkeep, it doesn't necessarily require diving deep into learning new spheres. So, as an entrepreneur, you'll come across things that you need to learn, whether that's new technology that you're implementing in your business, whether that's figuring out how to handle employee relations, all of those things. If you've grown your team, you'll have to figure out customer service, so many different aspects of the entrepreneurship space that doesn't necessarily, it's not the thing that you think about when you first think of entrepreneurship. So that whole concept of wearing many hats as an entrepreneur, that's essentially um, the essence of a lot of it, especially in the beginning, right? Before you build up that team, before you create your business so that it's like automatic on autopilot, running without you, before it's not dependent on you being present. It requires wearing those multiple hats. And that's where the continuous learning comes in. Whereas as an employee, you don't have to worry about customer service because the customer service team has got that. You don't have to worry about HR or employee retention, employee management, any of those things, because HR has got that. The managers have got that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as an entrepreneur, because you're continuously seeking growth, you're continuously seeking expansion, you're always looking out for the trends that are, up and coming in your field or at the forefront of your field. That requires continuous learning versus front loading your learning. And another thing that really comes to mind is the idea of trial by fire, where as an entrepreneur, a lot of it requires experimentation. It requires trying new things. It requires being really present in terms of figuring out what works and what doesn't. It requires being present in terms of figuring out um, the metrics, like the key learnings that you're pulling out, the insights of all of your experimentation. And of course, I'm referring to at the start, because most of us are at the point in our journeys where we're figuring out, should we go the path of entrepreneurship? And at this point in the journey, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a team behind you. So at the start, it will require you having that trial by fire, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Whereas as an employee, you don't necessarily need to worry about that, because depending on the size of the company that you are working at, a lot of these things are already figured out. Many jobs require just maintenance, right? Like making sure that we keep the business running, or what they call within my company, keep the lights on. That's essentially your job. Many times, like, keep the lights on. The lights are already on. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you're still figuring out how to turn the light on sometimes. And that's a major difference. So are you continuously learning? Are you the kind of person who wants to continuously learn, or are you the kind of person who just wants to front load a lot of your learning, like you did in college, for example, and apply that across the span of your career, with bits of learning here and there to keep up with um, where things are going, but you're not entirely reliant upon that trait of continuous learning? So that's the first thing. I also want to dive into work-life balance, because we just spoke about trial by fire, figuring out, like, what works, what doesn't. As an entrepreneur, one of the things that you can see, let's say, for example, the Gary V's of the world, who work hours upon hours, a lot of it is like firefighting. You are the head of the business, you are responsible for the business, you have employees under you who need to be paid, so you can't just willy-nilly just, you know go on vacation if you haven't set those structures up yet for you to be able to step away from your business and let it run without you. If you haven't yet set those structures up, you can't just willy-nilly go on vacation and let the business do whatever it may, like not continue its trajectory of growth in terms of revenue and the money, the finances that you're bringing in, because you've got employees who are relying on you and are essentially, you're their source of their paycheck, you're their source of stability, you're the way that they buy food for their family, et cetera, et cetera. So it really requires your hands-on presence in order to keep the business afloat, to keep the business running. And sometimes that means you might put in extra hours, because one, it sometimes requires the extra hours, but two, on the other hand, when you have your own business and you're bringing your vision to life and you're pouring your creativity into your business, you just naturally spend longer hours working on that thing, because you're energized in order to do that. And that's the key thing that I mentioned earlier about what is your divine calling. Because let's say your divine calling doesn't necessarily require you to be an entrepreneur, and the qualities of entrepreneurs doesn't really fit your blueprint of who you are at your core, then doing those things might be draining for you. Like having to figure out customer service, the HR, the finances, the taxes, all of that. All of those things might be draining for you. And if you don't have a ton of time and revenue already accumulated in your business, then a lot of that is going to fall on your in your hands. So um, it might be draining for you. Whereas someone else who does have that entrepreneurship trait and they're an employee, and they're, you go in, you get out, you're in and you're out, right? Like you go in at 9 a.m., you're out by 5 p.m. You're following a structure. You're literally like following the leader, unless you're a manager, unless you're a VP, unless you're this, all of these things. But then that kind of brings you more towards the entrepreneurial intrapreneurial mindset, which is a completely separate topic, which we can dive into. But if you're not necessarily at that level and you're essentially keeping things moving at the office, then you kind of have to follow the structures, the goals, the KPIs, the objectives that are set forth by the leadership team, essentially, or the company. And if they have stakeholders or anything like that, like if they're a public company, then you have to keep the investors paid, right? Keep them happy. So your goals, the goals of the business, are going to come before your vision, right? Because if it doesn't work for the business, it doesn't matter what your vision is. you've got to move that forward. That might be draining for some people. They don't want to fit into a mold of what other people want, right? So you need to really understand what the difference is for your own self. Like, where are you at your core at this very moment in time? Because you don't want your energy to be depleted if you're in the wrong space. So the topic of work life balance is important here, right? um are you okay with working those longer hours, especially in the beginning as an entrepreneur? Or do you want to have a very clearly defined role where um that by 5 p.m. you can go? You don't have to worry if the building is burning down when you leave, right? Like, that's the responsibility of the owners of the business, right? As the owner of the business, if the building is burning down right now, like, the business requires your attention right now, unless you have employees, right? But we've already cleared that up. And also, like I mentioned, the path of not the path necessarily, but the point of having a defined role. um and I think this is interesting too, because I have a sense that employers have caught on, right? That people want to have some level of ownership in the company, right? Because of the gig economy, because people are starting to own their own development, because people have this entrepreneurial itch, other people are doing it, so they might want to do it as well. Employers have caught on that people want a little bit more autonomy. So while in as an employee, there can be some level of entrepreneurship. At the end of the day that it's not 100% required of you. So some days you might want to be an entrepreneur, other days you might not want to be. And being an employee really gives you the space to play around with that, to dive into entrepreneurship versus diving into just your defined role. This is a little blurry. I wonder if others of you see that too. So I'm going to try, let's try this. Sorry, guys, this is a little awkward, but okay, I think that's better. That's better. Um, so, yes, jumping back into it, I think another cool thing about being an employee that you don't necessarily get out of the box as an entrepreneur is a community. And that's where a little bit more of the work life balance also comes in, right? Because when you're, let's say, at the office, for me personally, I'm working a job right now and I love to go into the office mainly because of the community, right? Not my entire team, right? Like, my entire team, the majority of my team is working remotely, but the few people who come into the office from my team, plus the people who come into the office from the other teams, we have formed a really great community on our floor where we hang out with each other, we grab lunch with each other. On Fridays, we might have drinks, or, this couple of Fridays ago, we all went to the park and it was a lot of fun. So there's a built in community with employment that you don't necessarily get as an entrepreneur, where you have to seek out your community. And for those entrepreneurs who have social media followings, for example, you know that you can create your own community. But of course, that's the difference, right? Where do you want this built-in community, or do you want to seek out your own community? Are you going to, you know, uh, lead the charge in creating a community? So I think that's a key thing there too, right? Because that requires work, that requires vision, that requires leadership. These are a lot of the traits that are required in the entrepreneurship path that you don't necessarily need. Is it useful? Absolutely. But is it hardcore required as an employee? Not necessarily, depending on your role. So, work life balance in the sense of community as well, that also is a big indicator of where you want to be. And of course, it doesn't mean that you need to be that for the rest of your life. You don't need to be an employee for the rest of your life. You don't need to be an entrepreneur for the rest of your life. But it's about, where are you called to right now? So, the next thing I also want to chat about is risk versus predictability and safety and security, right? As hello, Rosa. Yes, very important topic. It's really important, I think, to really, especially this day and age where there are so many people leaving the 9 to 5 traditional model and moving into entrepreneurship. And some people might not necessarily be entrepreneurs or even want to be. So, are you following your calling or are you following the crowd? And I think it's really important to talk about it and view this larger societal topic from that perspective. So, risk, predictability, safety, and security. Inherent in entrepreneurship, especially in the beginning, is some level of risk. Can you stomach the level of risk that entrepreneurship requires? Or do you even want to be in a risk taking role in your life? Or are you the kind of person who actually thrives off of predictability? Are you the kind of person who thrives off of safety and security? So there's the stability or predictability of schedule, of your paycheck, of the benefits, your retirement plans, um, when you're working a job versus as an entrepreneur, you don't know when your next paycheck is coming in. Your schedule sometimes can be on demand if you haven't set the structures up to have a particular schedule. But let's say your website goes down and you don't have employees that are managing your website at 8 p.m. at night. Well, do you really want your website to be down for the rest of the night while you hang out and fall asleep? No, you probably want to fix it prior to falling asleep. So there's not necessarily that predictability of schedule. And like I mentioned, the paycheck, the benefits, health insurance, there are so many things that we get for free for free. When I say for free, I just mean out of the box as employees that we can opt out of, but by default we're very likely opted into um, within a job that you don't get as an entrepreneur. Like for example, one of my jobs I had a 4K 401k plan or whatever, and then my employer contributed 50% of whatever I contributed. So if I put in $100, my employer contributed $50 on those $100, for example. So there's a lot of those benefits that you get as an employee that are built in that you don't get as an entrepreneur that you have to figure out on your own. Taxes, you get a W-2 form as an employee. You don't get that as an entrepreneur. You have to pay your taxes by the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. So the way I like to view it from the perspective of risk, predictability, safety, and security is that your job is your provider in many ways. So, this is for the single ladies out there, like the people that we love to follow, especially if you're in the spaces that I like to be within. For example, Mina Irfan, Giordana Tocacelli. These are women who talk about providership, right? Like men being providers. And I absolutely adore that. What happens when you don't yet have that provider, right? When you don't have that man in your life just yet? What do you do in that sense? So, in many ways, I like to view, and of course, this all comes down to who you are at your core and the essence of who you are. For right now, at this stage of my life, I like to view my job as my provider because it's predict predictably giving me a paycheck. It's, all the health insurance stuff is all figured out, it's all covered. The schedule is there, et cetera, et cetera. So your job is your provider if you're currently working at a 9 to 5. And if you decide that you no longer want that, that is perfectly okay. As long as you're making a conscious choice and you're doing it from a place of self awareness, you're doing it from a place of excitement, and you are being called to do otherwise. Because one of the things that I heard this past weekend, I went to um, uh, oh my God, YCP conference. I always forget what that stands for, Young Catholic Professionals Conference. And one of the things they said is that you don't move until God tells you to move. So, for those of you who believe in God or are religious in any way, that spiritual and all of that, you can fit that to match whatever you believe in, the universe, your higher self. I really love that. You don't move until that higher power tells you to move. So even if you do want to go the route of entrepreneurship, you want to do it responsibly and you really want to think it through. Um, so yes, are you a risk taker or are you more of the kind of person who needs that security? So what about you guys who are like me that need a hybrid, right? What if you're a hybrid at this very moment in time in your life? And this is the approach I have taken in my own career. I've always said that in my career, the way I make decisions is adventure over security. I always go for the adventure versus the security. And you, if any of you have been following my story for the past, who knows, 5 to 10 years, you know that I have switched careers. I've been in the real estate space, I've been in marketing, and I'm currently a software engineer. So to me, that's adventure. I want to explore, I want to see everything, I want to taste everything. And you can do that as an entrepreneur, right? Because you can start multiple businesses, you can launch multiple courses or multiple products, et cetera, et cetera. But you also have to remember that if you want to maintain a specific business, to keep the revenue coming in, then it's important to understand what works and what doesn't. Whereas as an employee, if I want to be an entry level employee forever and just continuously switch careers, if I so choose to, I can do that because the businesses that I work for aren't necessarily depending on me being an expert at any one particular thing, because they are holding the container for me to learn on the job. And that's what I personally have enjoyed for the past few years. Does that mean that's where my life is headed? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean I want to do that forever. But it just goes to show that if you are the person who either is still figuring it out, or you are, sometimes you like the entrepreneurship, risk taking aspect of life, sometimes you like the flavor of stability and security, predictability, you can have a little bit of that even if you're maintaining your job. um, I personally like to get a fix of that risk taking. And then sometimes I like to get a fix of that security. So you don't necessarily need to leave your job. And I'll be talking about this tomorrow. Like, should you quit your 9 to 5? Um, but sometimes you might just want to dabble in entrepreneurship while you're holding that job. So that is essentially the few things. Before we leave, I also want to share that I am super excited to launch the masterclass that I shared with you guys earlier. Essentially, it is called The Divine Calling: The Energetics of Entrepreneurship versus Employment. And we're going to deep dive into this very topic. So today we covered the characteristics or the energetics in general of one versus the other. In this masterclass, we're going to deep dive into you so that you embrace your own blueprint. Then we're going to workshop. We're going to workshop mapping what you're called to taking that path on, right? Like if you're called to be an entrepreneur, then what are you called to do? And if you're working a job, should you quit the job now? Should you quit it later? We're going to answer a lot of those questions. And in the masterclass, we're also going to deep dive into some embodiment practices based on the work model that you are called to. So, my big question, my big premise here is, are you burning yourself out trying to live someone else's calling, right? Like, are you meant to be that person who is secure, living the predictable path, but you're trying to be an entrepreneur because everyone else is doing it? That can be draining, that can be depleting, and that can really just make you broke at the end of the day. Or are you an entrepreneur at heart, but you're stuck at this 9 to 5 that is just like holding your ankles like shackles and won't let you fly high the way you want to be? So, this is what we're going to deep dive into the masterclass. The link is in the description box. And feel free to sign up. The masterclass essentially will be happening live at the beginning of May. So once you sign up, I'll be sending an email later on with specific details. So that is essentially it for today. And I also want to state, though, that one big clue that something has to change for you, is like I just mentioned, like, are you feeling drained or depleted? Are you doing one versus the other? And either of those things are making you feel drained or depleted. That means something has got to change. It doesn't mean you need to go from employment to entrepreneurship. It doesn't mean you need to go from entrepreneurship to employment, but it does mean you've got to figure something out. Or for those of you who feel like you're stuck in limbo, like you are here nor there, you're there nor here, and or you're trying to do both and it's just exhausting. You haven't made the decision, you haven't fully aligned with where you want to be. Do you want to start that business? Or do you want to keep your 9 to 5, continue to make your job your provider? If you're stuck in limbo and just like second guessing, haven't really made a decision, one foot in, one foot out, jumping in, jumping out, that's perfectly okay. Trust me, I know exactly what that feels like, but that's also some of the topics that we're going to cover throughout the series and also in the masterclass. So, specifically for those of you who feel like you're stuck in limbo, tomorrow I will be speaking directly to you. Um, so, we're going to talk about that. Should you be leaving your 9 to 5? All of this requires self awareness, experimentation. So, let's experiment together. Um, let's see if we have any questions. And again, um, there we go. It was blurry for a second. So, let's see. Oops. Let me bring this over and fix the blurriness a little bit. Hey, when that happens, I never know how to fix it. Okay, so it'll just be blurry for a little bit. So, taking a question that we have here, as a stay-at-home mom, I'm feeling called to start my own business. Okay, yeah, you see, that's one of the things to really think about, right? Because as a stay-at-home mom, it sounds to me like you have a provider, right? And if that's the case, then this is a very beautiful space to be in because you have the freedom. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I understood incorrectly, but it sounds like you have the freedom, you have the time, you have the space, depending on the age of your child or your own energy levels, to really pursue doing that, starting your own business. So it's a mixture of what is your calling, but also what are your circumstances at this very point in time, which is why I mentioned at some point in time, you're called to do one versus the other. So I really love that, Erica. Thanks for sharing. I identified as a hybrid too. PT job for community and a stable PT. I'm assuming that means part-time job for community and a stable source of income, possibly some benefits, and also an entrepreneur to tickle my creativity and have a sense of adventure. Oh yes, that 100% sounds like me at this very point in time, where it's like the community aspect is there at the job. I've got, all I have to do is leave home, go to the office, and I'm bound to see people that I absolutely adore. I'm working at Spotify right now, and they just have this beautiful culture of calmness, restfulness, femininity. They're a Swedish company, so I feel like they bring a lot of that culture, even though this particular office is based in New York. And that stable income, I mean, many times it can feel like a golden handcuffs, right? Because it's like, well, if I leave my job to start this business, then I won't have that consistent income coming in. So that's also something for us to think about. Like, are you at a point in time, are you the type of person who wants to go all in? And let's say, for example, you're figuring out to quit your job to start that business. And you decide you want to do that. Are you the kind of person who wants to go all in and quit your job even before you started the business? Or are you the kind of person who needs a little bit of a transition period where you start the business as you work, um, and bring in some, generate some revenue so that you can then quit your job with the momentum already built? Or are you at the point in your path where you're just like, I just can't do it anymore? But yes, tickle the creativity, a sense of adventure. That is 100% exactly how I feel many times. So, unless there's anything else, we will end it here for today. And we will pick that very specific conversation back up tomorrow, where we will dive into, should you be quitting your 9 to 5 or not? Anyways, thank you all so much for being here today. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye. Nice, nice. Yep. Yeah, I dropped the link to the masterclass in the description box as well, so you can feel free to sign up there. But catch you all later. Bye.